Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my first looks review of the Panasonic Lumix S1R II, a high-end full-frame mirrorless camera with a 44 megapixel BSI sensor and 8K video. Announced in February 2025 and costing around $3,300 or £3,000, it's the new flagship in the Lumix S series, and while it may numerically be the successor to the original S1R from 2019, it's better to think of it as a more powerful version of the more recent S5 IIX, with high-resolution photo and video, along with enhanced controls and features. I tried an early sample on a Lumix press trip to Tromsø in Norway, giving me the chance to test it under cold, wintry conditions. I believe the image quality is final, so I'm going to be sharing lots of photos and videos with you. I hope to follow up this video with a more in-depth review based on longer-term testing of a sample running final firmware. Placing the earlier S5 II next to the new S1R II, you can see both share much of the same design DNA, and certainly if you're familiar with a recent Lumix body, you're going to be right at home here. The grip's essentially the same, and in terms of build quality it feels similar to the S5 II in my hands so far. Panasonic describes it as being dust, splash and freeze resistant. I certainly carried it around Tromsø, exposed to freezing sleet and snow showers without any issues. There are, however, a number of key control differences, so let's take a closer look at them and the general layout. Starting at the front, you'll notice a second chunky red record button in the corner, which you can operate with your left hand or when you're facing the camera. And there's also a front-facing tally light. On the upper left side is the drive mode dial, sharing the same modes as the S5 II, including two customizable burst options. But unlike the S5 II, it's now lockable with a ballpoint pen style button in the middle. More crucially for a general operation though, it also sports a new collar underneath, selecting between photo, video or S&Q modes. That's slow and quick for video. Like other recent cameras sharing the same strategy, this sensibly relocates the movie mode from the main mode dial, and bonus points to Panasonic for also maintaining separate settings between photo, video and S&Q modes. These include the exposure, the white balance, photo style, metering and autofocus mode. In the middle is the viewfinder head with a hot shoe on top. Anyone familiar with the S5 II may notice the same vents around the head, one running along the underside at the front and a pair on either side, cunningly hidden behind the drive and mode dials. These work alongside an active cooling system which should allow longer video recording times depending on the mode and your conditions. The position and the design of the vents shouldn't compromise weather sealing. On the upper right side is the main mode dial with a redesigned power collar below it, but unlike the S5 II, this dial is also now lockable using the same push button mechanism as the drive dial. As before, there's a bold red record button along with three more buttons along the top providing direct access to the white balance, ISO sensitivity and exposure compensation. Note the bumps on the ISO button in the middle which help you feel which one you're about to push. Again, like the S5 II, there's finger and thumb dials, with the latter now being a little bit taller and more pronounced as you turn it. Round the back there's a locking switch in the upper left corner, while to the upper right side there's the same AF mode collar around an AF area button. These join an AF on button, along with a joystick and rear wheel which can also tilt like a joypad. Add the touchscreen and you've got a wealth of physical controls, most of which can be customised with independent functions whether you're shooting photo, video or in the S&Q mode. Meanwhile, an LED in the top right corner at the back can also act as a rear tally lamp. For eye-level composition, there's a 5.76 million dot OLED panel with 0.78 times magnification and the choice of 60 or 120 frames per second refresh rates. You're looking at it right now in a variety of modes. The resolution is a nice boost over the 3.68 million dot EVF of the S5 II, and it looks great in use. It also avoided lowering the resolution while focusing, so it delivers a consistent experience. The screen employs a 3-inch 1840K dot panel, sharing the same spec as the S5 II, but now mounted on a cunning mechanism which can both flip out to the side to face you or back on itself for protection, as well as alternatively just tilting vertically up or down in line with the optical axis. It's a clever approach that we've seen on some other recent bodies including Sony's A1 II, but it's important to remember that Panasonic got there first, or at least I think they did, with the much earlier S1H. Either way, it's a really flexible solution to offering both types of screen articulation, and it's cleverly accommodated in this body with minimal impact to the thickness. Behind four rubber flaps on the left side you'll find the ports, starting with 3.5mm microphone and headphone jacks, followed by USB-C and full-size HDMI. Lumix fans will note the S5 II positioned the USB and HDMI ports behind a single flap, but now they've got their own. Maybe they fell out. The USB-C can be used for charging or powering the camera with a suitable power delivery source, as well as for data transfer and wired tethering to computers or phones. A new Lumix Flow app allows you to use your phone as an external monitor over USB-C, as well as providing scripting, editing, sharing and other collaborative tools. It requires a minimum of iOS 15.4 or Android 10, and you can see it here running on my old Samsung Galaxy S20. There's some lag, but this may just be my phone, so further testing is required. I was able to adjust the autofocusing area by touching the actual phone screen and trigger recordings with it too, but they're recorded to the camera's internal cards, not the phone's internal storage, so it's not going to replace an external recorder. But it is handy if you fancy a larger, brighter screen without carrying anything more than your phone and a USB-C cable. Like the S5 IIX, you can also connect an external USB-C SSD drive for fast and cheap external storage, although doing so does disable both card slots, so I don't think you can record to the SSD and a card at the same time. Oh, and in case you wondered, the USB-C port doesn't yet allow the camera to be used as a standard webcam, but I do keep asking, so maybe they'll listen. On the grip side, you'll find two card slots, but rather than the twin SD slots of the S5 II, Panasonic has gone for one CF Express Type B and one UHS 2 SD. You can still write to both simultaneously for backup or record different media types to each, but the faster CF Express slot allows the camera to support some pretty impressive video specs that I'll mention in just a moment. The camera is powered by the same DMW BLK22 battery as the S5 II, and if you'd like more power or vertical grip, there's a new BG2 accessory. Moving on to the sensor, the S1R II employs a full-frame 44 megapixel BSI with a standard sensitivity range of 80 to 51,200 ISO. It's a dual native ISO sensor too, switching at 400 ISO for photos. Oh, and there's now also an option to close the shutter at power off to protect the sensor from dust. Panasonic's opted not to go stacked with the sensor, presumably partly to keep the cost down, but also to support potentially greater dynamic range. That said, it will invariably suffer from more pronounced rolling shutter than stacked models, so choose widely depending on your requirements, and I'm going to show how this looks in just a moment. Meanwhile, the 44 megapixel resolution means the S1R II isn't pitched against the Leica SL3 in terms of pure detail. Have we seen this sensor before though? It does look similar to that in the DJI Ronin 4D 8K, but it does have different specs to the original Canon R5 in case you were wondering. Either way, I'll show you some early tests. Now the sensor has IBIS of course, with Panasonic claiming up to 8 stops of compensation, depending as usual on the lens. I'm going to be doing some more formal tests, but for now here's a shot that I took in pretty blustery conditions at 200mm using a shutter speed of just 25th of a second. This was using the 70-200 f4 lens, which also supports dual IS2. In the menus, you can choose between 6 different aspect ratios, along with 2 JPEG compression levels with or without a RAW file. There's also 3 lower photo resolutions at 22.5, 11.5 or 2.5 megapixels. Like the S5 II though, there's no RAW compression options, nor any chance to switch JPEG for HIF, which both feel a little bit odd for a new camera in 2025. I've fed this back to Panasonic and hopefully it may come in a future firmware update, we'll see. Meanwhile, fine JPEGs and RAW files typically measure around 20 and 60 megabytes each respectively. Okay, let's have a look at the image quality, starting with a 44 megapixel image that I shot using the Sigma 45mm f2.8 lens, and at the lowest base sensitivity of 80 ISO. Let's zoom in for a closer look where you're going to see plenty of fine detail. If you'd like more detail though, the S1R II offers a pixel shifting high-res mode, which can generate a larger file in camera, albeit with the usual caveats regarding elements which may have moved during the capture process. So let's put this single frame 44 megapixel version on the left and the high-res version on the right, first using the LL option, which generates a file with 88 megapixels. There's certainly more detail resolved on the right, but the camera also offers an XL mode with up to 176 megapixels, so let's now swap them. Now there's even finer detail visible, especially around the roof, windows and fencing areas. Meanwhile, there are processing options to deal with some movement, as well as a handheld mode if preferred. You can also choose to record the high-res files as JPEGs, RAWs or both, and again the composite is generated in camera in just a few seconds, no need to export them to software later. Like earlier models, there's a wealth of shooting modes for photographers, including a choice of bracketing, multiple exposures, time-lapse and live composite options, as well as the cunning hybrid zoom mode first seen on the Lumix S9, so check out my review of that to see how it works. I couldn't find a bulb timer though, which would have been handy for long exposure fans. Moving on, the S1R II sports improved subject recognition with the choice of human, animal, car, bike, train and aeroplane. Each of these has two options, either recognising multiple subjects, which you can switch between using the joystick or screen, or drilling down to one subject but with greater accuracy on, say, the eyes or face. I'll show you both on yours truly, starting with human subject and the target parts set to the broader eye, face and body mode. And I'm using the Lumix S50mm 1.8 here wide open and with AFC and the full AF area. Note how it keeps an AF box over my head when I turn away and one around my torso from a distance, not to mention how small I can be on the frame and still have it recognise my face and eyes. And if there were more people on the frame, you'd see boxes around several of them. Next, for the same test, but with the target parts set to human eyes and faces. This is more accurate on your eyes, but at the cost of not recognising a body or multiple subjects. You can see this as I turn away from the camera, both near and far, although it does still identify me as a target to focus on regardless. It just doesn't know that I'm a human. I also tried it for birds and vehicles and found it delivered a step up in accuracy over the S5 II, not to mention recognising subjects when they were smaller on the frame. Now there's no face registration as yet, but I did enjoy quickly switching between multiple detected subjects, whether they were people, animals or vehicles. In terms of burst, the S1R II can shoot at up to 10 frames per second using the mechanical shutter, and that includes with continuous autofocus, or up to 40 frames per second with the silent electronic shutter. The latter also sports a pre-burst mode with options for half to 1.5 seconds of action recorded before you fully push down on the shutter. Now the practicality of an electronic shutter does very much depend on skewing, so let's compare some bursts that I took starting here with the mechanical shutter at 10 frames per second. And I've used a 35mm lens here and matched the subject size and distance with other recent reviews of mine for comparison. Here you can see the bottle remaining upright as you'd expect. Next, for the electronic shutter, firing at 40 frames per second, so you're going to be seeing 4 times as many frames, but I maintained the panning speed. This time, notice how the bottle is leaning to the side due to rolling shutter. I'd say it's quite obvious in this test, and while I was panning quickly, it is something that you should expect, especially when following fast action or wildlife with a long lens. In those situations, you may prefer to switch to the slower and audible mechanical shutter, which avoids this effect. Next, we'll look at the video quality and features, with the S1R II offering a wealth of options depending on whether the format is set to MP4, MOV or ProRes. Here's the quality menu for MOV when the camera is set to the PAL region, so you're going to be seeing 25, 50 and 100p frame rates, but these switch to 24, 30, 60 and 120 when the camera is set to NTSC. So there's 1080, 4K or Cinema 4K available from 24 to 120p in long GOP or all-eye compression, and as I scroll through the options, note the icons at the bottom indicating which storage system is supported. Slot 1 refers to CF Express, and you'll see slot 2, that's the SD card, disappear for the higher bitrate modes. There's also 5.8 and 5.9K up to 60p and 8K up to 30p, as well as OpenGate 6.4K using the full height of the 3x2 sensor. Panasonic has promised 8.1K OpenGate in a future firmware update, so that's something to look forward to. Impressively, you can record ProRes internally in 422, HQ and even RAW formats depending on the card. For example, you can record 1080 50p in ProRes 422HQ onto SD, but more demanding modes will require CF Express or an external SSD. The best quality option in ProRes is 5.8K up to 30p in ProRes RAW HQ. Now many cameras offer external RAW video over HDMI, but it's nice to allow it internally here, and personally speaking, ProRes RAW is much easier for me to work with than say Canon's proprietary RAW video format. Now I'm sure the internet is going to be flooded with overheating tests on this camera, but to add mine to the mix, I personally managed an hour and 12 minutes of 10-bit 4K 25 before the camera stopped, and this was with the fan set to auto in a fairly cool room, but it may be possible to record for longer with it set higher. Okay, let's now take a look at some footage that I filmed, again with the Sigma 45 2.8 lens, starting in 1080 at 25p, which is uncropped horizontally. Although at 50 or 60p, you're going to incur a mild 1.1 times crop. and at 100 or 120p this becomes a tad tighter still at 1.17 times. No, I couldn't find any faster frame rates for 1080 in S&Q. Now for 4K, which shares the same crops at matching frame rates. So you start with uncropped footage up to 30p, before incurring a 1.1 times crop at 50 or 60p, and finally a 1.17 times crop at 100 or 120p. And here's how the 8K looks at 25p, which is going to be much the same as 4K does on my timeline here, but of course you have the opportunity to punch in for a closer look and potentially reframe without much loss of quality. Or for even greater reframing, film in the open gate mode, which records the full height of the 3x2 shape sensor, providing greater flexibility in post. For example, using the same clip to generate both wide and tall versions for different platforms. Panasonic says the footage is oversampled in 4K up to 60p, and when you look at the numbers, the S1R II looks like it starts with the full 8K when generating 4K up to 30p, and around 7.8K when generating 4K at 50 or 60p, hence that minor crop. Does make me wonder though if they'll add a 7.8K 60p mode in the future. Either way, 1.1 times is still fairly mild for oversampled 4K up to 60p. And as far as I could tell, phase detect autofocus and subject detection were both available at all resolutions up to 60p, but at 100 and 120p you're going to lose subject recognition, and focus pulls became a little bit slower in my tests, so maybe it's switching to DFD at those frame rates. Again, more testing required. V-Log is available along with a new Cine-like A2 profile with dual base sensitivities of 200 and 1000 ISO for V-Log, or 160 and 800 for Cine-like A2. When filming V-Log, there's also a new dynamic range expansion option, giving you an extra stop or so of headroom, albeit at the cost of slower readout, so do watch out for potentially increased skewing. Speaking of which, hold on to your lunches as it's time for my rolling shutter tests, starting here at 1080 25p, where you're going to see some skewing if you really swing the camera back and forth. Likewise in 4K at 25p here, again exhibiting the skewing jello effect with vigorous movements side to side. And now in 8K 25p showing a similar effect. And finally, let's put standard 4K 25 on the left and the new dynamic range expansion version on the right, graded from V-Log. I'd say there is a little more skewing on the latter as expected, but both are suffering under these extreme conditions, so I would recommend being a bit more gentle with your movements. In terms of other video features, the S1R II gets proxy files and frame IO support, a movie self-timer mode that's handy for presenters working alone, real-time LUTs, waveform and vector scope monitors, and a new false color mode that can aid exposure control. Before wrapping up, I wanted to talk in more detail about a new cropless digital stabilization mode, which claims to improve steadiness, but without the usual crop. Now this initially seems to defy logic, as digital stabilization normally needs a border of pixels to work with that's around a reduced capture area, and the S1R II certainly offers those options too. So where's the camera getting the data from to perform the digital stabilization in the cropless mode? Well, in a genius move, Panasonic realised that most mirrorless lenses, especially wider ones, are already cropping in a little when performing distortion compensation with their profiles. Now this area is normally just discarded when delivering standard photos and videos, but they realised it could also be used to perform digital stabilisation without affecting the actual final coverage. Pretty cunning stuff. So here's a clip that I filmed with cropless stabilisation enabled on the Lumix S 18mm 1.8 lens, where I'm walking along the side of this boat. So you're looking at a combination of standard sensor shift IBIS working alongside digital stabilization that's using the data that's then cropped out during distortion compensation. It's certainly smoother than versions that are filmed with IBIS alone. Of course, it is very much dependent on the lens you're using, as some do employ more distortion compensation than others. Unsurprisingly, this means it works best of all with wider lenses like the 18 that I've used here, and I should add that it is not available on third-party lenses, at least not yet. But in terms of recycling previously wasted data, it's a genius move that can bring genuine improvements to stability without compromising the field of view. Meanwhile, the other traditional cropped digital modes do remain available, as they may be more appropriate or suitable for different lenses or different motion. Okay, now it's finally time for my verdict so far, during which I'll share more photos taken with an early S1R II. The Lumix S1R II takes the core design and feature set of the S5 IIX, boosts the resolution of photos and video, upgrades the viewfinder detail and the screen flexibility, enhances the subject detection, improves the controls, and sprinkles in some nice new features to become their most powerful hybrid camera to date. Now, I know some of you are going to be disappointed that Panasonic chose not to go with a stacked sensor nor the highest possible resolution, and it's true there is visible skewing if you throw the camera around while using the electronic shutter for photos or when filming video. But these in turn have allowed a lower price point while avoiding stepping on the toes of L-mount partner Leica in terms of pure resolution. And lest we forget, unstacked sensors generally perform better in terms of noise and dynamic range, so it's important that you weigh up which sensor technology best meets your needs. I was certainly very pleased with the photo quality out of this camera and the chance to generate higher resolution files with the pixel shifting mode. And while the video does incur crops at higher frame rates, it's still pretty mild at 1.1 times for 60p and 1.17 times for 120. And in terms of genuinely new innovation, the cropless stabilization is so cunning you could pin a tail on it and call it a fox. So if you don't need the speed of a stacked sensor, or single frames measuring over 44 megapixels, there's actually little that the S1R2 can't do, nor any major features that it's missing, at least that I can think of right now. In terms of competition, there's certainly a bunch of previously more expensive cameras that have now become discounted to cost only a little bit more than the S1R's initial launch price. For example, Canon's original EOS R5 appears closest in sensor specs, but the S1R II has active cooling, a more flexible screen, open-gate video and oversampled 4K 60, not to mention access to third-party lenses. Sony's A7S III and A7R5, along with Nikon's ZA, are also worth weighing up, albeit each of these models with quite different overall feature sets. Perhaps the biggest competition will come from a future A7 IV or R6 III, but who knows what specs they're going to have. So right now, there's actually little to directly compete against the S1R II, and if you're already invested in L-mount, it's positioned nicely between the bargain S5 II and the Leica SL3. It could also represent a nice upgrade from a lower end or an aging model. And that's all I have for you until I get the chance to perform more tests on a final production model, so do let me know what you'd like me to test or look out for. I'd also love to hear what you think in the comments, and if you found this video useful, please do consider giving it a like and my channel a follow. It only takes a couple of seconds and it's very much appreciated. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.